Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio with something a little bit new to me. We've got these double strip tumbler rulers here in the shop, and one of the girls here said to me, have you ever used it? And I looked at it and I thought, no, I haven't. This is not one I've got in my stash. So I was given this one to have a little play with, and that's what I've been doing. So I thought I would come and share it with you because I've actually really enjoyed working with it. Now I've been working with strips with it. It's called a double strip. Basically, if I just put the ruler under the close-up, we'll talk a little bit about the ruler first, and then I'll talk about how I've been utilising it. So we've got this 2.5 inch ruler on the bottom, so it allows you to cut 2.5 inch wide strips. And then you've got this 4.5 inch tumbler at shape at the top. And this ruler has been designed that you can put two 2.5 inch strips together to make your 4.5 inch piece. So that's what I've been doing. Now also, if we have a look at the ruler, let me just move that across so that's underneath. You can see here, we've got these 3 little diagrams, and that's a solid one because of course you can also just cut a 4.5 inch wide strip and cut a tumbler shape from that. We've got this one here where we've got 2.5 inch strips, and we can make our tumblers like that. And we've got this one here that's got 4 strips, so we can join 4 1.5 inch strips, and we can make a tumbler shape from that as well. So as soon as I sort of saw the 2.5 and the 1.5, of course my little brain lit up and thought this is going to be perfect for me working with my scraps. So it's just a very basic little instruction which comes with this because it's not a complicated ruler to use. So I'll just put that in underneath, and you can see here where they've got the version where they're showing you how to cut with the 2.5 inch strips, 2.5 inch strips. But it says about the sizes in the instructions as well. So I've been having a little play with this. Now I will say, for the sake of transparency, tumblers are not the easiest shape to work with. I've worked with tumbler shapes in the past, but not this particular ruler, because they've got a bit of a funny angle with them, and it's sometimes a little bit hard to judge how much to sort of let your fabric hang off by for your 1/4 inch. So I'm going to show you a couple of techniques of how to get that to work for you. So don't be put off. It's a little bit more complex than some of our simpler shapes, but it's doable. So you know, anybody that's motivated enough and has a little bit of patience, we can do this. We can all do this. Now the other thing, disclosure, I will say, is for the first couple of rows, I've never done so much unpicking because I kept getting it wrong. So it took my brain a little while for the pattern to sort of go in and for me to sort of realise a sort of a simpler way of doing that. So I've gone through the pain, so you can all benefit from that. So let's have a look at it in action first of all. I'll come back to the other shapes. Let me show you what I've been doing with it, and then stick with me till the end, and I'll show you the cutting and the versions of the plain tumblers, because there's a little slightly different technique. If you're just cutting your tumblers from one fabric, there's a slightly different technique of how to put them together as to what I'm going to show you here now. So we'll come back to those. Don't let me forget. So 2 strips. I've been working with strips. Now the jelly roll I've been working with was one that I'd had for a demo, and I had about 30 odd strips left. And I thought, oh, I might as well use that up and make a small baby quilt with this. So the fabric I'm using here is called Pips Jelly Roll, and it's got sort of a variety of these more sort of earthy tone colours, and then some sort of pastels. And it's got these cute little dogs and little girls, and I think there's a little boy on a scooter on here as well. So this one I've been using is called Pips, but I've also been out into the shop and just grabbed some other jelly rolls that I thought would work with this. Now I'm going to start here. Monochrome. I was thinking actually this might look really good in monochrome. So we've got this one which is called Bloom and Grow, and yeah, it's monochrome, so you're not going to get a huge amount of difference, but I actually think this would actually make quite a nice monochrome pattern. So I grabbed that one, so I think that's something a little bit different, because sometimes we get a bit stuck of ideas of what to do with monochrome fabrics. Then I also grabbed this one because I'm thinking spring. Spring is in the air, and all the colours there would look great from a more sort of spring-styled quilt. And this one is called Flirtation. So that's a really nice, if I put it that way, you can see all the different colours in there. So I think that would work well in this. And then I went more summer with this Free Spirit. Now with this one, yeah, so this is Kaffe, Fassett and Morris & Co design roll, so by Free Spirit, but you can see all the Kaffe fabrics there. But this would look really sort of vibrant, to the point where I'm not sure you would really see a lot of the shapes. You would just see lots and lots and lots of colour. So this one would be fun, and definitely one I think Katrina would gravitate towards. So that's that one as well. So just some ideas of some other sort of jelly rolls that we can do. Now let me just clear my space because I'm going to need a little bit of an area to work. So I'm just going to put those over there for now, and then we'll have a tidy up properly in a minute. So first of all, I'll talk about the markings on the rulers. Let's get some sewing done, and then we can have a look at the markings on the rulers that help with that. Now I have been putting some strips together. Now these are just some leftover strips. This is one that was left over from that. And you can see here these cute little puppy dogs on there chasing a ball, I think he is. So what I decided to do, because I found from a full width of fabric strip, you can cut 12 tumbler shapes, or 2. You can cut 12 tumbler shapes, but it gets a bit tight right at the end. So I started, let me put it that way around so it makes a little bit more sense, by just offsetting those first 2 pieces. Just by sort of the width of the selvage is all I needed to do, and that just made sure that I had enough room to cut my 12th tumbler right at the end. Now sometimes I say to people that you can cut your strips in half and just work with a half width strip, which you could for this, but the warning is you will not get as many tumbler shapes out of it. So where you can, if you work with the full width of fabric strip, you will get more tumbler shapes. So the first thing I did was went through the jelly roll and just put all the strips into pairs, matched everything up into pairs. And then you can just sort of sew and chain piece them through. Now you can see that's how I just offset. So basically I put the top edge of the selvage there against the bottom edge of the selvage on the bottom strip. And I'm just going to pin that bit in place. But I'm now going to take that to the machine and we're going to sew 1/4 of an inch down the length of that strip. Now I don't need to start on my starter scrap because I've actually got this little bit of selvage here to start with. Now the other thing I perhaps should say, now this is a fabric, if you looked at the little short we did the other day about whether or not to include the pinked edge into the seam allowance, this is a strip that measures 2.5 inches wide with the pinked edge. Now there was one comment I saw from that short that somebody said it looks like it's bigger with the pinked edge. I think it was just the angle of the camera and I hadn't quite got the ruler on it, but this is definitely one where you need to include the pinked edge in your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now if you wanted to pin all the way along this strips to make it easier to sew, you can. I just tend to line them up as I go. So once we've sewn our strips, and normally I would just keep going and just chain piece all of the strips through, one after the other. Now you can sort of see I'm using some remnants here, but you would have your full width of fabric. Now what I found is you need to iron, and I pressed all my seams towards the bottom fabric, and that will make sure that our seams will nest a little bit later on. Or go in opposite directions, they don't actually nest as such. Now if you notice on this fabric, I've got directional fabric. Don't worry about that. Some of them are going to end up upside down, whatever you do, so I didn't worry about that. Now once we've got it sewn like that and I've pressed my seam towards the bottom strip, I can just get my tumbler ruler now and let me just show you now the markings on this. Just making sure I'm in the centre of the camera. So we've got these lines on the tumbler ruler. So when we're working with strips, either the 1.5 or the 2.5, we've got places where we can line up our seams to make sure that we're on track in terms of having our tumbler shapes all right. So that makes it really simple for lining up. You've got your straighter grain there, and then you just line it up with the bottom line there. Now these little cutouts look a bit odd, but they're in the ruler so that so you can actually get your rotary cutter in there and cut without going into the ruler. So we can lay this down, and I'm probably going to need this on the wider angle because I need to go all the way along this strip. So we can line up that centre seam, and actually if I move my tumbler shape as far over as I can without getting the selvage in there, and then I can cut. Now, because we've got these sort of bits here where there's no ruler, what I tended to do was lay the ruler on, put my hand on there, and just gave that fabric a little bit of tension just to make sure that these were lying flat. And then we can cut 5 tumbler shapes at a time. Now, I tended for this first one, and you want to keep your rotary cutter fairly upright and just slowly cut away from you. But you can sort of do it just by moving yourself. So very quickly and simply. Now this one I'm going to turn around and cut again, but you can very simply and quickly cut lots of tumbler shapes. So that's what I've been doing with those. As I said, I've paired them all up. Let me just trim that one. Now, sorry, just before I move on, let me just show you this. Because we've started with an angle here, if we put our ruler down that way again, this first one was starting without anything to hold that fabric down. So turn your ruler around, and when you recut, it means that that piece of fabric is under the ruler, so it's holding it a lot flatter. So when we start our cutting again along the strip, we've got something holding the fabric down rather than having that loose bit of fabric at the beginning. So that's just the other bit to say about that. Now I am just going to finish cutting this one just because it's going to bug me if I don't. So there we are, that's our 5th shape, and that's all the waste we've got, which is mostly selvage from that. And when you get to the other end, there's very little waste with this ruler, so I really like that. So that's all our shapes. So I'm just going to have a tidy up, and then I'm going to bring out some other shapes, and I'm going to show you a little bit about layout, because we now need to talk about decisions on layout. So layout, because the one thing with this is after I made all my strip sets, I then cut all of my tumbler shapes, and then you have to lay them out. Now you don't have to lay them all out at once, but I did. I, sort of cleared an area on my design floor and just laid them all out into their rows, because we're going to sew all of these into rows, and then we're going to put the rows together once they're all sewn. So I thought it'd be easier if I just laid them all out, and then if I needed to match any somewhere else or swap any out, I could. Just to make sure that I didn't end up with a bunch of ones that all look the same by the time I came to the end. But some people will just like put them in a basket or something, and whatever they pull out, they'll sew next to the ones. Now, my only rule for this is I didn't want 2 of the same fabrics touching each other, just to make sure that all the colours sort of spread themselves out a little bit. But there are some decisions we need to make at this point about layout, which is going to help us when we come to sew our rows together. So I just wanted to cover that. Now I've just got 3 rows laid out here of where I've got to so far, but I've got some other spare ones here, and I'm just going to lay these out and show you. Now the layout I've got here, we've got the tumbler shapes which alternate in direction, and then my row underneath, so where I've got a large base here, it starts with a large base and then small. So all the shapes are coming together, but you'll notice that with that, all these seams, I'm going to have to nest the seams when it comes to sewing the rows together. Now, that's absolutely fine. That's a decision choice that I've made, and I'm quite happy to do that and sit and patiently sort of pin and sew the rows, and I will be pinning when I come to do these. But you can lay them out, and this is what I wanted to show you. So let's just take some of these here and put them next to each other, just picking a different colour there. You can lay them out so that they're all going in the same, let's stick to my rule of thumb, Jeanette. Nothing of the same colour touching each other. You can do it so that they all facing. So everything in this row, all the tumblers are going to be facing up. All the tumblers in this row are going to be facing down. All the tumblers in this row is going to be facing up. And by doing that, you'll notice here that when we come to sew these together, we won't have any match points. There'll be nothing to match. So that's going to save us a bit of time later when it comes to putting the rows together. So that might be a decision we want to make at this point. So have a think about, you know, do you want them touching, do you not? Now, the other thing you could do is you could do them like this, but offset them. So let's just do our little matching wide with a wide strip, narrow with a narrow, and then wide with a wide. But instead of having them lined up, we could do it so we offset. And then here, you could take a half tumbler shape, and all I've done is literally just tumbler shape, cut it in half, and we could fill in that area there with a half tumbler, and we could have it like that. Now that also is going to mean that we've got no match points when we come to sew the rows together. So these are some things you have to think about at this point before we start laying them out as to how we're going to put our rows together and whether or not we want those match points. So that's just something to think about, but I think all the ways look nice. I almost went for this, or almost went for the offset staggered look, but in the end I thought, no, I think I want them lined up. It's a little bit more work, but I'm happy to sit there and do that. So I just wanted to cover that point with that, and for any tumbler shape, not just the double strip ones, for any tumbler shape, those are the choices, or some of the choices that you've got when making it. So let's have a look then, once we've got everything all laid out into our rows, and they're all my spares, we can start putting the rows together. Now, organisation is key with this one, which, you know, I'm pretty good at. Katrina may struggle a little bit more, but I'm sure she'd be fine. But I found number them. Once I'd laid them all out, and I've got 12 tumblers in a row, and I'm going to have 14 rows, is I just put a little bit of paper with the number 1, and then I stacked all of my tumblers in order. And that's the next bit we're going to have a look at. So I'm already now on labelling row number 10. I'm working on rows number 9 and 10. Now, the other thing to say about when working with rows is this isn't the sort of project you're just going to sit down and do for hours and hours and hours and hours. You have to actually focus quite a bit. So I found the easiest way for me to tackle this was just to do an hour on it, maybe 2 hours, or just think, oh, I'll just do 2 rows and then I'll go and do something different. It's quite not labour intensive, but you have to concentrate quite a lot with it, so it can get very tiring quite quickly, is what I think I'm trying to say there. So, you know, break it down into smaller chunks. There's no law that says, you know, when we start something we have to keep working on it for hours and hours and hours until it's finished. We can break it down into bite-sized chunks, and that's definitely how I work, because I get quite bored quite easily and then have to sort of go off and do something a bit more fun. So these are the rows. Now, I found the best way of sewing them was to add a tumbler at a time. Now, my natural way of piecing is always pieced in pairs, and then pairs become 4s, 4 become 8. And this is where some of the unpicking was happening at the beginning, because when I was doing that, I was getting myself a little bit confused about which bit went where, and getting the tumbler shapes turned round, and then they didn't fit. So I had to unpick. So I found the best way of doing it is definitely just add one tumbler shape at a time. I worked on 2 rows at a time so I could keep chain piecing it through, but it was definitely just have them in order and work through. So if I show you my little stack I've got here in my little basket. So that's my little stack. So this is row number 11, and they're all in the order, in the right orientation. So when I come to work on this, I can just start with that first one and then just work through. Now, my other top tip for staying organised with this is label your first tumbler as soon as you start working with it, because it's really easy to get that first tumbler when you add your second and to forget which was the first tumbler again. So I put a pin and label that very first one, so I always know where the beginning of my row is, so I know where I need to be adding my next tumbler. So that's just another thing I learned from doing this about organisation, staying organised. So let's sew, because there's a little bit of a technique of how these need to come together. So as well as labelling that first one, I also label my stack. So let's just take that. So this is row 9. On row 9, I've just got one more tumbler to add, and on row 10, I've got these. So in a minute, I might need row 11, so I'll have that at hand. So let's take this to the machine, and I'll show you how you need to sew them so that you get everything lined up. So I'm going to put my little stack there. And I'm going to start with this row number 10. Now, this is where we definitely need pins. So I've got my number 10 stacked there, and I keep that little piece of paper on top of there. So I'm going to grab myself a ruler. Now, let me just show you this shape. Okay, so put that there, and hopefully I don't knock it off. Now, because of these funny angles, it's a little bit difficult to guess where to add that so that our top and bottoms line up. But because we've got a seam here, that helps us with our match points. So this shape is going to go like that. So I'm going to just flip this one over, and I'm going to mark my 1/4 inch just on that seam. So let me put that right in under the camera. So you can see there, that's my 1/4 inch mark on the inside, on the back side of the tumbler shape. Now, while I've got this one in my hand, I'm also going to flip it over, and I'm going to mark on the opposite side. So that's where the mark is there. But on this side here, I'm also going to make just a little dot where my 1/4 inch is here. And then the shape's going to go like that. So we're going to get a pin, and we're going to put it down through our 1/4 inch mark there. Now push that pin all the way so that the head sits right on top of the fabric. Now on this one, I've already marked, I've got a little dot right there for my 1/4 inch. And I'm going to push that pin, and if you push that pin so the pin head sits right on top of that fabric, it will push those two fabrics together. And then I know that that centre line is going to be lined up. So then I put 3 other pins in. Now this is the number of pins that work best for me, but if you can do it with less, do it with less. If you need more, do it with more. Just do what works for you. And just make sure that the edges of your fabric are lined up and that everything's lying nice and flat underneath. Well, that's a bit of a bent pin. And then I'm just going to swizzle that one round. So that's holding the seam. So now we're going to sew. Now, sorry, I'm just going to grab a bit of scrap fabric to start on, because that's quite a small point there. So I'm going to leave my pins there because I'm going to need them again in a minute. Now, once you get there, I find that that's sort of held enough that you can take that last pin out. Now, before I break the thread on that one, I'm going to pull in my second row here, and I'm going to attach this final one to there. Now, I don't need to mark on this side now because this is the last one, so I just need to mark my 1/4 inch there, which I've done already. So it's going to go like so, so that when we flip it over, I'm going to do the same again, put a pin. Now, I didn't find, and I've got a little mark there, 1/4 inch in, for my pin to go in. Now, I didn't find that there was any fast track method that worked very well for this. It was just a matter of sitting and patiently just adding one, doing the pinning, sewing. But like I said, this is where, you know, I could just sit down and each day I think, right, I'm just going to sew 2 rows. And it soon comes together. I'm just going to turn that pin, and then we can just put this one through. So if I show you under the camera there now, you can see where my seams match there. So using that pin really helps with alignment, and because we've made our tumbler shapes from the 2 strips, that really helps. Now let me just put one more on here just so that repetition, that's how we learn. So this time the shape's going like that. So I'm going to flip it towards me, and that's the side I need to mark my 1/4 inch. Oh, let's make that a little bit darker. And then the opposite side here, I'm going to mark while I've got that shape in my hand, because that's going to end up being where I need to put the pin through on the next one. So that's how it goes. That's our 1/4 inch mark there. Push a pin down through. Find our mark here, which is there. Push our pin all the way through. These are really long pins. And I'm going to get 3 more pins. I just found the four pin method worked. And really these 2 pins are helping hold that seam. So there it is. And then I can just go through. Just making sure that doesn't move. And once I get beyond that seam, that pin can go. So it's quite methodical. You just, there we are, and there's our seam. So let me just bring them right out under the close-up so you can see. But it's a really nice, having that seam really helps with alignment on the tumbler shapes I found for this. So I really liked it. Like I say, it just takes a bit of time. So I just finger press that, put that right in under the close-up so you can see there how we've managed to match that there. We're matched at the top and the bottom of the shape, and also with our seam there. So they're coming out. So that's my 9th row. So that's 9. So I've got 5 more rows to do, and we've already made a start on 10. So a couple more sessions on that, because like I say, I just tend to do a couple of rows at a time and then move on to something else, just so that it doesn't begin to feel like it's a chore. When you've got something that takes a little bit more time, sometimes it can feel a little bit like, oh, I just want to move on. But you just have to take your time, a little bit of patience, which isn't always my strong point. So let me just lay out some other rows for you here so you can just see that, how that's going to look. And then we'll have a look at the other shapes. So that's row number, oh no, I need row number 4. We'll look at the other shapes, but I'll also talk to you a little bit now about finishing the edges. So let's get one more row on, row number 6. And hopefully most of that is in shot. I think you might have lost some at the edge there, but you can probably see enough of it to start to get the idea of how it's looking. So I think it's a really nice, fun children's quilt with all the little blocks of colour. So that's how it's going to look. And like I say, once all the rows are together, I'll start putting sewing rows, and that I'll be able to do in pairs, so I can go back to my normal piecing in pairs. Now, before I get to that point, I'm going to have to make some decisions before I finish this row completely about how I'm going to finish the edges, because I've got a couple of choices here. Well, 3 choices, I think, to my mind. I can either, once it's all sewn together, just trim. And if I put that ruler there, you'll see all I'll be trimming off, I'll trim it to the narrowest point there, is just these little bits here. So it's not a huge amount of waste. And that will give us a straight edge to then either finish there or add a border to. Or I could put in some of my part shapes. And actually, let's do one. Let's do one, and you just have to get it the right way around. I'm trying to get it, so there we are. So that the right angle matches. That one goes, it's small goes to big, big goes to small. That's the way to, oh, she says, no, that's not the right one, that's the right one. There's lots of angles, so if you're angularly challenged, it just takes a little bit of thinking about. There we are. And then have we got one more that will go there? I think we have one more half one. So you can see there, that begins to straighten off that edge with half tumblers. And like I say, all I've done is literally just cut that tumbler shape in half. So I could choose to do it like that with half tumblers. I could trim, or I could do that, but in a background, in a border colour. So instead of having those like that, I could put solid ones in and then use that and incorporate that into a border. So I've not quite decided on which of those options I'm going to choose to finish that, but I do need to make a decision before I start sewing the rows together, because if I need to be piecing in part hexagons, I need to do that on the rows before I start joining them. So I will just have a little think about that as I'm making my other rows. I think I've almost made a decision, almost, but not quite. I'm not 100% there. So that's how we do it. That's how we put all the rows together. I will bring it back at a future point and perhaps do a part 2 about sort of finishing off the edges and show you that and show you how I've chosen to do that. But let's just go back to the ruler and let's just have a look at what we do if we work with strips. So I've just sewn some of my scraps together there. Where did I put the rotary cutter? So for this one, as long as you've got 4.5 inches in height, we could cut tumbler shapes. Now, this is designed to cut multiples, but you don't have to cut multiples. So this is where I started thinking, oh, this is going to be really good for my scraps, because I can just take 4 1.5 inch scraps. Now, some of these weren't 1.5 inches. They were a bit random size, but that's okay. But we can cut a tumbler shape. And if I just swizzle the ruler around. But the cutting went really fast because I was cutting multiples. It went really fast. I think it took me more time to lay it all out than it did to actually sew the strips and cut them all. So that's what our stripey made up of 1.5 inch or ish. I think that one might be slightly different size, but I just put enough strips together to get to my 4.5 inches. So that's what that would look. So that would be a really nice fun one. And I'm thinking if I did that, I perhaps wouldn't do every tumbler shape all strippy. I would put solid ones in between. And really just sort of mix it up. So, you know, future Jeanette might be doing something with that, using her scraps. Because it's 4.5 inches, it works with our 5 inch charm pack squares, and we don't have to trim anything down first. So I've just put, so charm pack challenge idea. And then actually I'm gonna use this side of the ruler first, and I'm just gonna give myself a straight edge because we've got a pinked edge there. Oh. So I'm just going to give myself a straight edge to work to, and then I can line that up. And always when we're using lines on rulers, you want to make sure the line sits on top of the fabric, so it's not sort of touching the base of the fabric. The line just sits right on the edge of that fabric, otherwise we're undercutting by the width of that line each time. And then, now I'm actually going to move that over and save, because I can see I might get a hexagon out of that. Now I know some people save their offcuts, centre it, save the offcuts, sew them back together and then make another smaller tumbler shape from it. And then I always turn the fabric round. So we always want to be cutting away from ourselves, so if we do slip, we're not sliding into ourselves. That you're going to be shocked, I'm going to throw that away. Can't do much with that. So we can cut that from 5 inch squares, and there's a couple of tumbler shapes from 5 inch squares, so that's a really good use of either a charm pack or leftover. Or here I've cut a 5.5 inch strip, and I've got this folded double, so I'm going to be cutting 2 at a time. It's a symmetrical shape, so we don't have to worry about that. And then we can line that up again and then just do our cutting. Ooh. You need to hold the rotary cutter quite upright. Oh, that did cut. I think I might have run over something underneath. It felt like it didn't cut. And then that one, let's just swizzle that around. I can't leave things half cut. It's not in my nature. There we are. So we can cut tumbler shapes from 4.5-inch strips. So really fun one, like I say, not my ruler, not one I've used before, but I've had a lot of fun doing it. It has tested my patience in terms of getting everything lined up, because the first couple of methods I tried to get the tumblers to align didn't work at all. So I had to go back to the drawing board and rethink that one. So let's just have a quick look. Because on these shapes, there's no seam to match. So how do we line it up on these? So I'm just going to flip those over. That's the wrong side. That's the wrong side. And I'm going to grab this ruler. And we need to do the same thing. We need to mark our 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to go in 1/4 inch there and 1/4 inch there. 1/4 inch there, 1/4 inch there. So everywhere where those crosshairs are, that's my 1/4 inch. Oh, my pen's coming undone. So let's just do that on this one, because we need them both marked. So this is, I mean, you know, it's not particularly difficult with the tumbler shapes, but it's just a little bit more time consuming, because there's just some extra steps that we need to do to help with alignment. And if we don't do this, what we end up with is our shaped stair stepping, so our edges don't line up. And then that gives us more problems when we sew our rows together. So a little bit of investment in time here saves us time further down the road. So we've got our 2 shapes like so. So once again, they're going to go together like that. So here now, we are going to do the same trick with the pin. Put it through there. And then I can actually see that crosshatch through there. Oh, not quite. You could mark the top, but because I'm making quite a big mark, I like to do the underneath. And always push that head all the way through, because it helps pull those 2 fabrics together. And then hopefully now, let's find another pin, that should be going through there. So once I've got those 2 pins in, I can just put some other pins. 2 pins will probably be enough, but let's do 3. And I can swizzle that pin round, swizzle that pin round. So let's just do a quick sew on that one. Now, just before you sew, I'll just show you sort of the little bit that is hanging off, and it's really hard to judge that without having a point to pin through and to get that accurate each time. It's just this tiny, tiny little bit there. So I'm just going to pull that pin out a little bit. Oh. Just need to shove that forward a little bit. So when we open that out now, you can see that line goes all the way along and our 2 shapes line up. Like I say, without doing that match point, you can get, you know, that goes up higher or that goes up lower. And then we haven't got a consistent place to do our 1/4 inch seam from, and then our rows can sort of start getting thrown out. So it just does take a little bit of extra time just to do the marking, to get the alignment. I find in that respect, having the 2 strips and having that centre line actually makes it a little bit easier than with a solid square. Of course, if we're doing something with 4 strips, if they're all the same width strips, we're going to have several match points within our tumbler shape to line up. Sorry, excuse me. But it's a really fun one. It's not really difficult. You just need to sort of take your time and do it, and just methodically work through the techniques to get everything to come out all in alignment. So I've had some great fun with this ruler. Like I say, absolutely new to me. So I've only been playing with it over the last sort of couple of weeks. But definitely one I'm thinking, yeah, that's going to work really well for future scrap quilts, particularly for children's quilts. I think the tumbler shape works really well in a children's quilt. So thank you. A little bit more of an intensive sort of technique style one with the tumbler shapes, but a lot of fun to do. Really enjoyed it. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for your time today. And I hope you'll join us again here next time in the sewing studio.